In my experience with supposedly enlightened people, they have actually much more vivid, lively, entertaining, funny, interesting, intelligent personalities than the norm. And yet their subjective experience may very much be that their predominant orientation is impersonal. And yet, because the wave has realized that it's actually the ocean, but it doesn't cease being a wave when it realizes it's the ocean. And in fact, once it knows it's the ocean, it can become a tidal wave. There's so much more water that it can, imbibe and incorporate and rise up as. So personally, this whole thing of people becoming impersonal or, more colorless or flat in their personalities as the ego is disassembled doesn't jibe with my experience, either personally or observationally.
Yeah. I think, like you said, more vitality. You can
Yeah.
fill up the cup with more of what this instrument is supposed to be. There's this strain in a lot of spiritual traditions, this kind of dissociative idea of like, I'm not the body, I'm not my ego. These separation orientations to get one to unity or to understand oneness or non-duality or what have you. The thing is my experience has shown me that it's all happening simultaneously, and the whole point is not to cut yourself off, separate yourself off from any of it, because it's all happening simultaneously. So none of it's not true. It's just maybe more in the language of the yogis, they'd say Purusha and Prakriti, or maybe in the language of Einstein, he would say something like relativity. Time and space is relative. So this relative self is Keith, it's the ego, it's this body, speaking to you. But at the same time, an absolute self is something else, and the absolute level is, I think, where we share and/or are one and/or are infinite. And then this relative self is this vehicle and this structure that's there that you cannot change in your life, in the general sense of like, you have an instrument, you have a saxophone, you have a guitar, it's like made by Fender, it's made by Gibson, it has a certain tone to it, has a certain shape. That's what you get, that's what you're working with. And the idea that you want to negate that or basically like swap it out for something else is already some kind of dissociative, unfortunate thing that is maybe a something like a vestige from previous iterations of spiritual traditions.
Yeah, perhaps recluse traditions that somehow influenced non-recluse portions of society and made them more, disinterested in relative life, which is not a necessary prerequisite for higher states of consciousness, and in fact might be counterindicated for someone whose dharma or natural tendency is to be involved in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The ascetic or the renunciate traditions, particularly that massive influence so many of us have experienced from the Eastern traditions of yoga and Buddhism and Taoism, what have you. Although Taoism is not really as renunciate as Buddhist and yogic tendencies are. Um, I think that those are very representative of the masculine tendency towards spiritual work, whereas the feminine is exemplified much more in an embracing and an embodiment in the world, which is quite different. And we obviously don't have a strong feminine representation in our spiritual traditions and in the way in which we're receiving these kind of generational bodies of wisdom. So I think that's really important to keep in mind.